Hey, so great to see Brad Faxon. Brad, thanks so much for joining us today on Questions for Cancer Research. How are you?
I'm doing good, Chris. Thanks for staying patient with me and glad we're getting to do this.
No, you have been a busy man. It's so great to have you locked in here today. I really enjoyed the playoffs. I thought you and your colleagues did a great job, and really excited next week that you guys will be up doing the Ryder Cup from Bethpage Black, which will be amazing. But something definitely caught my eye as soon as we got on camera here, and you told me it's Ryder Cup related. Tell me a little bit about what that beautiful eagle that's over your shoulder there.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to go up to New York on Monday. Obviously, we work for NBC as a golf analyst there, and I don't think there's anything more exciting for anyone, really, whether you're in the media, you're a fan, or you're a player, to be able to be part of the Ryder Cup every single year is just incredible, Chris. And I was fortunate enough to play in two of them, one in 1995 in New York, the last time it was played in New York, and then that was at Oak Hill. And then this is from Valderrama in Spain in 1997. It's really a cool piece. The owner of Valderrama was a guy named Patino, Jose Patino, or I think everybody called him Jimmy. But there was an architect that designed this named Ortega. And it's really kind of cool when you look at this. This is the Rock of Gibraltar here, which is right there on the coast when you come into Europe and this by water. And he designed the American Eagle to swoop down here after the Ryder Cup. So it had symbolism from both the European side and from the American side. This obviously a gift that was given to just the American team. So there were only 12 to the players. The captain, Tom Kite, it was kind of donated by Tom and Christie through the PGA of America. And then Patino kept one for Valderrama, which I believe is still there. But to be able to see something like this is just fantastic.
That is really incredible. Especially for the American side to have an eagle swooping in there. That's pretty special. And I love your whole background there. I know it's not quite Arnold Palmer's
Nothing close.
warehouse, but it's pretty impressive back there, no question.
Well, this is my garage, Chris, and I started using this space in during COVID when everybody was kind of captive at home and we did so many things by Zoom. And I ended up putting a carpet in this garage where I've given some lessons in here. It's not ideal, but it works. I needed a space for some of my clubs that I still use, some of the clubs that I have used. Then the bags that are up there behind me, two of them are from those Ryder Cups. So it's worked out well. Golf shoes, the Scotty Cameron stuff that I get, a lot of the head covers are on the different racks that are in here. So it's really become another room in our house. I've got some air conditioning in here, so the stuff stays pretty cooled down. And I forgot to tell you, this sculpture is bronze. It weighs 75 pounds. So it's not an easy piece to just leave anywhere in the house. And it always seems like every 2 years there's meaning to bring it out of captivity, and let everybody see it. But it is magnificent. It's got meaning. There's a lot of emotion there. That was the first time the Ryder Cup was played on the continent of Europe. Seve Ballesteros was the captain that particular year, and he's kind of the Europeans. He was the Americans' nemesis, but he's the Europeans' inspiration. There's nobody that they speak with in higher tones than Seve.
Yeah, no, Seve really turned those things around. And I guess when you started playing, didn't look at the exact history, but probably when you first got into it, America was still kind of at the dominant side, right? And things started to change a little bit there as Seve came in.
It was as Seve, as Sandy Lyle, as Nick Faldo, as Bernard Langer, as all those players were starting to win a ton in Europe and starting to come over here. So you saw their names in the American team had been so dominant in the Ryder Cup. In 1979 was when the Ryder Cup finally decided, let's let continental Europe play. And that allowed, if you talk about the Swedes, the Spaniards, the Germans, the Italians, the Spanish, the French, there's been so many different countries represented, and I've got to check on France now that I've said it. And you've got the guys from Belgium now, the two Højgaard twins. So Danish players. I mean, it added a lot of players, and since then we haven't been nearly as dominant, particularly away. We haven't won in over 30 years in Europe, and the home field advantage in the Ryder Cup, as everybody knows, is a huge advantage. And the last time an away team won was in 2012 in Chicago, when the Europeans staged an improbable comeback in singles when they were down 10-6 and came back to win. Martin Keimer made a big putt in the 18th hole there and stunned the golfing world.
Yeah, you just walked right into one of my early questions. I definitely want to start with the Ryder Cup, and that's what I wanted to ask you about, right? So 2012, Medina, Chicago. I mean, almost a near miraculous Sunday singles by the Europeans. I think they had 8 wins, 1 tie, came back to win by a point. As you said, since then, the last 5 Ryder Cup matches, the home teams have won by 5 points, 6 points, 7 points, 10 points, and a 5 point victory last year by Europe in Rome. Bethpage Black, very formidable, very daunting for any team to think they could go in there with those New York fans and win. But this European team, I mean, they return 11 out of 12 players. A lot of them have really been playing well. I mean, these guys might be able to do it.
It's interesting, all the things you start to look at, especially when you're doing the broadcast, that could make a difference. And the home team always gets the ability to figure out course setup, and that would include fairway width, length of rough, height of rough, green speeds. I think you're never complete control with weather, but I think that the Americans' playbook this year, like it has been the last several years, is we're going to take advantage of the length of the players off the tee that we have and not make the rough as high, because typically the Americans have outdriven distance-wise by close to 5 or 6 yards over the if you look at the two teams. This year, there's a very slight edge for the Europeans in driving distance. So I don't think this course setup is going to lead to a huge advantage for the Americans like they might want. The green speeds are going to be 12 to 12 and a half, which, if you mentioned it, 11 of 12 players on the European teams returning. The only different player is Rasmus Højgaard, replacing his brother Nikolai. And all of these players play on the PGA Tour. They're not all members, maybe, but they all have played handily over here, where it doesn't seem like course conditions are going to be a giant advantage to the Americans. I think both teams are going to have played enough practice rounds there that they're going to know the golf course well enough. I would say intimately. The European team is staying there right now this week. I don't know if they're playing Bethpage every day, but they're not going back to Europe, so they can avoid the time zone and the jet lag and the change there. And the American team is playing a little bit this week as well. I think they want to get their real work on the golf course in without a ton of crowds. And then when the gates open Tuesday morning, and that's when I'll first be there on the golf course on the site to see all the hoopla of what we're going to see during the week. I think you'll start to see what are the potential pairings, who's going to play together. I think we're all trying to guess who we're going to see Bryson DeChambeau with. Are we really going to see Scottie Scheffler continue to play with Russell Henley like he did at the President's Cup, which we covered last year on NBC at Royal Montreal? So there's a lot of those questions. And to the Europeans, they have Luke Donald returning as the captain after his fabulous job last year. They have tremendous faith in Luke. Will you see the stalwarts together a lot? Will the two live players, John Rahm and Tyrrell Hatton, play together? Will Rory play with Fleetwood? Will they stay the same? Will you put a bomber out there like Rasmus Højgaard hits it as far as Rory? Will you put him out there with someone with more experience, maybe like Justin Rose? I don't know. It's you always try and think about all these different pairings and the different directions they could go.
Yeah, it's funny because you said so many of these Europeans now are playing the PGA Tour. They're kind of used to our style of play, but I did think, and I mean, obviously the PGA of America has zero interest in what Chris O'Gorman has to say, but it might level the playing field a little bit, if you said, hey, we're going to let the visiting team set up the venue. That might even the playing field just a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think the home team's going to want to do that. I mean, we see in sport, in all sports, particularly here in America, the home field usually has the advantage. And if you look at percentage of win versus loss at home, depending on the sport, it's somewhere from 53 or 54%. It gets close to 60 in some sports. Soccer in Europe is a huge advantage for the home teams. But if you look at Ryder Cup home teams, it's off the charts. There's nothing even close to the Ryder Cup home advantage. And I gotta believe that, the 13th club for these Americans this year is going to be the crowds at Bethpage. We know what a New York crowd's like. We know what the fans can be a little extra jovial, boisterous, crude. Maybe you could throw that in there. And look, I think what everybody loves to see is a close match with not excessive crowd behavior where you're kicking people off the golf course.
I hope it doesn't get too out of control, but it's going to be a big time home court's advantage.
It will, and I think these players have been practicing. Our coach captain Luke Donald has had these players playing with excessive noise in the background, belligerent comments while they're in their swings, and the important thing for the Europeans is when they get out there on Tuesday is being nice to the crowd, showing them some smiling. Let's sign some autographs. Let's make us more likable. And I'll tell you what, these are household names, these Europeans now. You go down that list of who's, the highest ranked players in the world. Everybody obviously knows Rory McIlroy, probably the most popular golfer in the world. They haven't seen much of John Rahm, but he's tenacious. What a player. And Tommy Fleetwood broke through to win at the Tour Championship. Hatton's a bulldog as well. Justin Rose, who won the FedEx and the playoff over, Ryder Cupper as well. So over JJ Spawn, you're gonna see names that you like. You're gonna see names that you don't know maybe as much, like Rasmus Højgaard, great kid. Sepp Straka, who won twice this year on the PGA Tour, very consistent with a dynamic golf swing. And I'm missing a lot of players. Matt Fitzpatrick, a U.S. Open champion. They have a very good and experienced team. And, I don't think Luke Donald will be afraid to say, you know what, I'm just going to play my best players, 4 out of the 5 or 5 of these matches and just see how he goes with that.
Yeah, yeah. Let me just ask you, this has been thoroughly analyzed without a doubt, but Keegan's decision not to play was, source of a lot of interest. What do you think of that decision?
Really interesting how this whole dynamic has played out. Keegan got a call from the PGA of America. Seth Waugh, who was the CEO of the PGA of America at the time. Zach Johnson, I played in a member guest up at a place called Mountaintop in Cashiers. Saw Zach, and he was actually the player that called Keegan. And then Seth got on the phone with him and said, would you like to captain the 2025 Ryder Cup? And before I say what he said, I think we all remember from the show Full Swing that Keegan was caught on camera in that incredible series. Chad Mumm, the producer, did a great job. He was getting a phone call from Zach, hopefully to make this team, and he had his wife and his 2 boys right next to him, and sadly was told he's not playing, and they got this live. So Keegan was called by Seth and ironically Zach to be asked to be captain. And I thought when I first heard it, I go, that can't be true. He's 38 years old. He's one of the best players on the American side. Why wouldn't he want to play? And then he accepted the captaincy. He went to school at St. John's, very close by, played at Bethpage a ton, sports fanatic, Boston sports fanatic. And I was curious when he said yes to that how is this happening? There hasn't been a captain that young since Arnold Palmer back in 1963, when Arnold was the last captain at Eastlake. and he was a playing captain at 38 years old. And when Keegan started out this year playing well, he was getting interviewed all the time because he was the captain. He said, "I'm not going to play unless I qualify automatically." The qualifying system for both sides, 6 were automatically picked, and then 6 captain's choices, which puts a tremendous amount of pressure on a captain, honestly. And Keegan got close. He won the Travelers Championship over Tommy Fleetwood. He had some big finishes in some majors and some top finishes in some other events on some tough courses, tough fields. And then all the players that were close to being on the team were like behind Keegan, like, "Keegan, you should be playing." And as he got closer and closer, I think there was a little bit of pressure on him. We saw him play well at the BMW Championships, the second of the 3 playoff events. And I think he realized the enormity of the moment that, no, it's too late for me now to be both. I think honestly, if after he had won the Travelers Championship, Chris, this is a theory. If he had gone back to the PGA of America and said, "You know what, I'm playing well. If you had called me last year and asked me if I'd rather play or rather captain," everybody's going to say they'd rather play on a team under the condition that you give me the captaincy some other time. I know he's so excited. He's going to be a great captain. But I think if he had done that, then he could have had one of his vice captains, Jim Furyk, who was great captain of the President's Cup team, as captain Ryder Cup already. And he could have slid into a role and said, it's too big. The whole Ryder Cup situation, to be able to captain and play, is almost impossible now. It's very, very different than when Arnold last did it. With the media obligations, how big it's gotten, picking the teams when you're in the morning on Friday, you have to pick the afternoon teams, and you have to see what other players are doing. I think he's made a good choice. I think the Europeans were, boy, we'd like him to play because we know that would really take a lot for him to do well doing both. So I think he made a smart move. It was a selfless move to do that.
I think it was, and I think there would have been a ton of pressure on him, especially to play. But I did watch your interview. You did a good interview with Smiley Kaufman, probably right before the U.S. Open this summer, and you guys were speculating about it at that time, because Keegan was playing well, and you said, if this continues, what will he do? And you threw out the idea that obviously he'd love to play, he deserved to play. He can delegate this to his vice captains, which, as you said, Jim Furyk had some great experience. And we never really heard that talked about too much. And I don't know if that would have meant, him saying, "I'm not the captain. These guys are the captain. I'm there," or "I'm the captain in name only, and these guys are going to be making all the decisions," which is probably the only way it would have worked. But I never really heard that discussed a whole lot. And maybe that was just Keegan saying, "Hey, I said I was going to do this. I'm going to do it." But I thought it might have been a viable option.
Yeah, it could have been. You could argue that he's played as well or better than some of the players that he had to pick. Certainly when you are a captain, as you get closer and closer to the times when you have to make the picks, you want trending players, don't you? You want players that are starting to play well. And you could sit here and have a debate over the number 7 through number 12 picks. Boy, Ben Griffin, he played well all year long. He won twice. He played well in majors. He played well when he needed to. Plus, he's a flexible player that can play both formats. He's a good driver of the ball, very good scrappy player, good putter, which we need. I don't know. You could just kind of go and say, should Colin Morikawa have made it? Should Patrick Cantlay have made it? Should Cameron Young have made it? We got Bryson DeChambeau. We haven't seen him play with any of our players. How do you pair Bryson? There's so many question marks that we'll know the answers to, obviously, on Sunday night. But who's going to play the best? Who's going to turn out to be the star? Are we going to see a steady player like Russell Henley just proved to be again and again a guy that continues to hit good shots. And Chris, I really believe that if you're a rookie, and we have a few rookie players like Ben Griffin, like Cameron Young on the American team, the home field advantage for the Americans is going to really help, and it's going to be better for a rookie being home, for the Americans this year. And look, there's only one in the European team, so that shouldn't be a big difference. Like I said, Boygaard's played a lot in America this year. I just think there's so many question marks and so many ways to go. And then you have to have some luck. You have to have the players that you have that are playing good or have played well all year, like Scotty Scheffler. If he gets paired with Russell Henley or Sam Burns, who played last year in Italy, they could play great and still lose a match depending on who they play against. So that's the beauty of Ryder Cup.
Yeah, it is. I'll just ask you quickly. Obviously, Seth and his team wanted to go in a different direction. As you said, it was very unusual to ask somebody that young to be a Ryder Cup captain. When I look at this, I mean, the one thing that kind of stands out, and I get it, right? This only happens every 2 years. You've got a ton of qualified candidates. You can only have so many captains. But, I look at a guy like Freddie Couples' resume, and I'm thinking, how was he never a Ryder Cup captain? And maybe he will be before it's all said and done. He played in 5 Ryder Cups. He was a victorious captain in the President's Cup 3 times. He's been a vice captain a few times. Obviously, very, very well liked by the players. I get it. Only so many can do it. But when I look at Freddie's resume, I'm kind of surprised that he has not to date been a Ryder Cup captain.
You could look at several names, and Freddie's an obvious one that jumps out. Why didn't he ever become a captain? Larry Nelson. He was a PGA champion, a U.S. Open champion, had a superb Ryder Cup record. Why wasn't he ever a captain? Marco Mira won 2 majors in 1998. Tom Kite was the first captain, let me go with modern day, that was a non-PGA champion, PGA championship major, to be a captain. He had won the U.S. Open, obviously, at Pebble Beach in 92, but he was the first American captain in what we would say modern era that hadn't won the PGA championship. So that was one obstacle for players in the past, having not won the PGA. And then Tom Kite was the first captain, like I said, and that was 95. And now Freddie had won his Masters in 92. And there were whispers, maybe when Duval came on board, Tiger was a pro, Marco Mira was hanging with Tiger. And those guys kind of started saying we should be getting paid. And it got in the public and it got in the media. And I don't think the PGA of America liked that. I don't think the PGA of America wanted to pay the players. I don't think they should be being paid to play in this. I get the whole argument that the PGA of America makes money off this championship. They make a ton of money off this championship every 4 years. But they didn't for 70 years. They didn't make anything. They lost money on it. And only now that it's become a gigantic media show that it is, could you justify it? But at some point, to me, you play especially as the purses have grown on the PGA Tour. There's a real reason that you should just be playing for the love of the game. And yeah, you're taking a week out of your life. I get all that stuff, but there's no memory that you're going to have better than playing in the Ryder Cup, the closeness you have, the bonding you have with your teammates, with the wives, significant others, your caddies, the captains. There's like an intimacy there, obviously in a non-sexual way, but it's remarkable that these players think they deserve it. And my bone of contention is, look, are you going to try harder if you get paid 200,000 or 300,000 or 400,000? Then are you going to pay the same player, all the players the same amount? Shouldn't Scotty Scheffler get more money than Cameron Young? And you can go down this path. The Europeans were offered some money to play this year. They unanimously said, no, just put it in the kitty and make our experience better. I think that'll be a huge point of contention when it gets out there that the Americans are finally getting paid to play this year. A lot of that money is going to go to charities, but lots going in their own pocket as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a contentious issue. I mean, I don't know. I guess I've seen reports that 300,000 to charities of their choice and 200,000 in their pocket. I think Keegan's already said, all of his money will go to charity, and it's tough when the Europeans are saying, hey, and I think Rory's even come out and said, I would pay to play in the Ryder Cup, So this has been out there, as you said, though, going back to the David Duval days, and Xander Schauffele's dad has had some things to say, and sure enough, we had Hatgate in Rome, but we'll see. I hope whatever it is, it's going to happen, and I hope it just kind of passes and it doesn't become a big issue. But as you said, I mean, you go back to 1968, right, where the PGA Tour and the PGA of America split, and they said to the PGA of America, okay, you guys take the PGA Championship and the Ryder Cup. And as you said, how many years did they lose money? But the value of these properties right now, I mean, I would have no surprise to think that the private equity, guys are lining up at the door at the PGA of America headquarters these days saying, you guys have any interest in selling a piece of this? I mean, the value of these things is it's gone through the roof.
It has. And since the Live Tour has come along, and the PGA Tour is now partnered with the private equity group, the Strategic Sports Group, SSG, which is involved the Red Sox ownership, some of the Mets ownership, the Falcons. And now they've got this proliferation of capital, right? 1.5 billion. I know John Henry and Tom Werner, who are the Red Sox owners. I know them pretty well, and they were flabbergasted that the PGA Tour doesn't own the Ryder Cup, given that it's all PGA Tour players. So yeah, they didn't know that history from 1968. And yeah, the PGA of America, they should make some deal of partnership with someone like private equity, somebody with a media involvement, because this is going to keep going on. And every year, it's actually every 4 years when it's here in America where they really can make a ton of money.
Right. Yeah, I think I was looking into, I think the tour did cut a deal where they get 20% of the TV revenue. So they get a little bit of a piece, but it's really interesting that those guys didn't realize that the Ryder Cup was not part of the PGA Tour.
I had no idea.
Yeah. All right, we could talk about Ryder Cup all day, but let me move on to something else that surprisingly, it's been a little bit quiet. So let's just touch base on Live. So things have been a little bit quiet. I think, the last big departures were John Rahm, December 2023, maybe a month or two later. Tyrrell Hatton, an absolute world-class player, was probably recruited over there by John Rahm. Haven't seen any real big departures since. To someone looking at this from the outside, which is my perspective, I certainly feel like the PGA Tour is like, we don't necessarily want to really make a deal with these guys. I don't think they see Live anymore as a potential existential or serious threat to their existence. You're in touch with a lot of the guys up there. What's your take on, what's going on between Live and the tour right now?
Well, if I were, the public investment fund, and Yasser, who runs that fund, the trillions of dollars they've invested $6 billion in golf. It's one of their tiniest investments. And they stole some big players and some big names, and we all know who they are. And you mentioned Rahm and Hatton. We lost to Shambo. We lost Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka, Cam Smith, Joaquin Neiman, Phil Mickelson, Bubba Watson, some of the older players, the stalwarts like Lee Westwood. Just awful to see some of these guys go. Stenson was going to be the captain of the Ryder Cup when he went to Live and had to give that captaincy up. And then the threat from Jay Monahan, the then commissioner of the PGA Tour, said, hey, if you go to the Live Tour, you're never going to play in a PGA Tour event again. And that was a strong statement, as Greg Norman and was recruiting all these players. But they came up with, this idea of 54 events, shotgun start, try and change the way golf is broadcast and played. And they've had some success at some of the events. They've had players that have made a fortune by paying them upfront money guaranteeing them some values in their teams. The ratings have been poor. They've been on different channels that are hard to figure out or hard to watch. When they go up against the PGA Tour, they don't even come close. I don't think these players, when they got there, realized that they weren't going to get any world ranking points. And I think that was one of the things Greg Norman promised them was, look, you're going to be able to keep your world ranking points. You're going to stay eligible for these major championships. And a lot of them now are really surprised, like they haven't had a chance. And when you see a guy like John Rahm, I don't know what he says on the world ranking, 50 something. Come on, we know John Rahm's a top 10 in the world player, but they're only playing 14 events a year. If they want to play elsewhere, they can play in other parts in Asia. Some of them can play if they're a member still on the European Tour. But I was very surprised to hear, Chris, that just this year, players' contracts are being extended another year or two. Greg Norman stepped down. They have another person now who's the CEO that we don't really know much about, says he's a smart guy, but I really think the pathway back for these guys is going to be difficult. I don't think the PGA Tour players, particularly the players that are on that policy board, like Patrick Cantley, you can name a few of them. Adam Scott was on there, where we don't need you guys. You guys kind of deserted us. You took all this money. You're traitors, and I think that's really one of the big strong arms to keep them from coming back.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, they did hire Scott O'Neill, who's had experience in the U.S. here with NBA teams, NHL teams. He obviously must see some big upside, but I mean, from our perspective, if they're not going to continue to try and poach major players from the tour, I mean, I don't know does that mean they're just saying, hey, we're going to be an also ran, we're going to go into these small markets, like Adelaide, and we're going to get big crowds, but it's hard to envision, that's what they're going to do. But, just based on everything we're seeing, and there have been reports where they've come out and said, and I don't know if they're true, that they kind of want to get away from paying the big upfront bonuses and maybe increase the purchase. But, I think that the tour's had a great year. The TV ratings have been up. I don't think anybody's sitting around saying, gosh, I miss John Rahm. It's too bad we can't get to see Brooks more often and DJ. I mean, obviously those guys were hugely popular, and Bryson certainly has a big following, but it's kind of hard to envision, if you go back where we were a couple of years ago to say, is this still really a threat to the PGA Tour?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be now when they have all this kind of money. I think, the Live could keep doubling down and keep putting more and more money there. But I think these players are realizing how much they can make on the PGA Tour. They've heard enough from the players that went over there, the positives and the negatives. And like you said, these top players that have gone over there, I think they're very frustrated. The world ranking points haven't gotten there. I think some of the venues in the city they've gone to haven't been that well attended. Some have done very well. But now that private equity's entered the game, that was one of the things that came out of this, is something that was kind of a silver lining for the PGA Tour, not knowing how this was going to end up. And I'm sure the brass at the PGA Tour was like, ooh, we're in trouble. How do we combat this? And they figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, if you just go back and look, everything got accelerated in terms of the evaluations, and
Correct.
certainly Live and sparked a lot of that. But you go back and look at that. So the PGA Tour was valued at $12 billion, right? So I mean, you basically had a $12 billion entity that was being fully controlled by this not-for-profit group, right? The PGA Tour, which was pretty incredible. And I think without a doubt, it had outgrown that infrastructure. And obviously, she had the Strategic Sports Group has put in 1.5 billion. They may be able to put in another 1.5. But I will say it happened all pretty quickly. And I mean, it certainly happened concurrently with sports valuations overall going crazy, but it happened pretty quickly on the tour.
It did. And I think if you would have asked Jay Monahan, who's just retiring, stepping down to this Brian Rolapp, the new commissioner who came from the NFL, he would have laughed at that number of 12 billion. He said to me, and I was on the policy board 3 different times, 4 different times if you count the senior tour. If you had written up a check for $2 billion, that would have been, a lot. And, you mentioned the word nonprofit, and the tours always exist as a nonprofit, primarily for 2 reasons, Chris. One, so the title sponsors, when they put down their, you call it 5, 10, 15, $20 million for, a year, and they don't like to think of it as just 1 week, their investment with the PGA Tour, they can use that as deductible money. And everybody knows how much money the tour events raise for charities. I mean, huge amounts, which that's kind of gotten lost a little bit as the private equities monies come in there. The PGA Tour players also have an incredible retirement plan, the best in sports by far, that we've had to lobby in Washington quite a bit in order to keep that tax-exempt status. Maybe that's a jeopardy now with all this extra money, and how will that affect title sponsors going forward, or will it? But that, you know quite a bit, Chris. Like there's 1.5 billion in reserve here from this group to throw that in there if there's more money from the live guys. But I don't know that Scott O'Neill is going to be able to pull a rabbit out of the hat and just make people realize or come on over to live tour because they're getting paid a little bit of extra money. That's a ton of extra money. What am I saying? I think they know the best golf in the world is on the PGA Tour, and now the partnership with the DP World Tour, European Tour, and these players can play in so many of these signature events with $25 million purses on both sides of the pond. So the European Tour is getting to see the American players more often, and vice versa here.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll just keep this moving quickly. So you may have kind of answered this already. So in the next probably 2026, so Bryson DeChambeau has basically signaled that he wants to re-sign up with Liv, and he's basically said, "I know what my value is," and obviously he's got a big number in mind. But so guys like Brooks, Koepka, DJ. I think the official line from the tour now is once you finish with Liv, you have to go through a 1-year suspension, and then you have to come back and qualify, or you can get sponsors exemptions. So obviously, I get the feeling that Brooks and DJ are still playing a lot with these guys when they're home in Florida up there. They're all have remained pretty good friends. I mean, do you think there's any easy way for those guys to come back, or you think overall there's still pretty hard feelings about, hey, you guys left, you took the money, and you made the decision?
I think that's the feeling I'm getting from what I hear. What's going on is these players that stayed with the PGA Tour that are on the policy board, as good as it would be for the PGA Tour to have, I think we've named a handful of those important players, those impactful players, DeChambeau at the top of the list. I still think there's tremendous value in having guys like Koepka, Hatton, Neiman, who I thought was going to be a star. You keep naming all of them. Mickelson, would that be better for golf overall? Without a doubt. But I think John Rahm is Rahm really hurting the PGA Tour by leaving? And the numbers don't show that.
Yeah, yeah. This was a huge bounce back year for the tour. We had the dip, last year in the ratings, but for the ratings to come back this year, this was a huge year for the tour.
Huge year, and it's both the NBC team and the CBS Sports Network. I mean, I think we both do very good, albeit a lot different sort of styles in how we describe the action. But these last few months, the ratings have been through the roof, and that has been in regular season events, playoff events, certainly major championships.
Yeah, yeah. Brad, let me ask you a little bit about Rory. So, Rory accomplished an incredible feat this year, right? Only the 6th person to ever complete the career Grand Slam at Augusta. But it was tough. I think a lot of people thought, oh, Rory, he's got that off, the pressure off him, the floodgates are going to open. And I think we saw in the ensuing weeks just how much it took out of Rory, right? So he hadn't won a major overall since 2014. So he'd come back to Augusta, 11 years of the questions and the pressure. And, he handled it very professionally, handled it very well, but obviously it had weighed on him. From an outsider's perspective, it looked like it was tough.
It was tough. And you mentioned it since 2014. It goes back to Augusta, the first major every year. Loads of potential, expectations, quotes from the greats like Jack Nicklaus said as well as long and high and as much of a draw as Rory can hit. He's going to win, 10 of these. He's been hearing that for so long, and he's been so close so many times. I just think that playoff, the way he did it, where it looked like, oh my gosh, it's going to go to Justin Rose now, and then he hits that shot, comes back down the hill, makes it in the playoff, and 10 or 11 years of relief go out, and he's so honest and talking about this with the world. And to see a career Grand Slam, I mean, not many of the players that grew up watching Tiger are even close to a Grand Slam now. And then Rory does it, shows the world that he's strong, wins, two other signature events. He's had a heck of a year, adds the Irish Open for his fourth win. And then you watch Scotty Scheffler and what he's done. You go, wait a minute, what planet am I on? Scheffler wins two majors. He wins four other events now. Remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what Rory did. I think he won early in the year at Pebble Beach. He wins the
Yeah.
Players. He wins the Masters. I mean, obviously, Player of the Year type stuff. And Scotty winning the two Masters and a few others. I mean, I'm sorry, the two majors and a few others. Just incredible. But I'll just say, Rory's obviously a very popular figure in the world of golf, even in America, without a doubt. And it was pretty gut wrenching to follow that final
Oh,
round. Yeah, and nothing against Justin Rose by any means, but I can only imagine what it was like for his inner circle watching that whole thing unfold on Sunday. That must have been pretty tough.
it was. I'm lucky enough to be in that inner circle, having helped Rory a little bit with the putting the last 7, 8 years. And I was doing TV that week for live from the Masters for Golf Channel, and went out to watch him. I followed around the first 9 holes with my wife and some friends, and then I couldn't take it any longer. I had to go inside and watch on TV, and just agonizing. And just when you thought he had it for sure, then something happened, like 12 that you didn't expect. And you're like, this can't be, this can't be. And then he made the miraculous shots that he did on 15, the miraculous shot he did on 17. Agonizing to watch 18, and then spectacularly comes back and hits an unbelievable drive again on the 18th hole, and that wedge snuggles it up there to about 4 feet. So he's the most thrilling guy to watch. I can tell you that he's like a superhero to me. I mean, I've seen him around people in situations where you think he wouldn't spend any time saying hello or doesn't have the time for him, and he does. He's so immensely talented. It's just incredible. And I think he's the most popular player in the world, without a doubt.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. And I will say now, I mean, you have to look out over the next few years. I think Rory 36 now. I mean, that floodgate of majors, I mean, certainly there's incredible competition, but boy, he could go on a pretty decent major run over the next several years, right?
Well, you think so. And, you look at a player like Scheffler who's making this look so easy, seemingly, and everybody knows that it's not. A lot of things can get in the way. Rory, knock on wood, hasn't been hurt at all. He's an incredibly fit and dedicated guy in the gym. He practices hard, but he has fun off the course too. He's got a great life. He knows a lot of businessmen around the world. He has places he likes to travel, and now he's, in the throes of being a father and a husband with a 5-year-old just starting kindergarten. Yeah, will anything stop him, or will this should propel him on to greater things? Because as popular as this win was this year to win the Grand Slam, what will April bring back again when he goes back to defend? He said to Scotty Scheffler in the 18th green, he goes, who am I going to give this jacket to next year? I'd like to give it to myself, he said. Scotty's doing things that we haven't really thought could happen since Tiger's kind of slowed down. The record he has this year has been unbelievable to see what he does, because unlike Tiger and unlike Rory, Scheffler doesn't dominate by hitting it past anybody, really. He certainly has ample length, a dependable driver that he can, normally cut into the fairway when he needs to and get it out there a little bit further when he needs to. He can draw the ball if he has to. Um, from 150 to 200 yards, which is going to be a really important stat, I believe, at the Ryder Cup. He's as good as there is, as good as there's ever been with his iron play. He's figured out a way with the way he's swinging. He very rarely hits a pull hook. He always seems to hit an iron, seemingly conservative shots, but from 200 yards, 220 yards, hitting 5 irons, 6 irons, they always seem to be inside 20 feet and have a birdie putt.
I think we've learned over the last 10 or 15 years not to expect Tiger-esque things, but we've had a line of players, right? I mean, whether it be Rory, whether it be Jordan Spieth, Brooks Koepka, Dustin Johnson, John Rahm, these guys who looked like they were going to dominate really couldn't sustain it. But boy, oh boy, you watch Scotty over the last 2 or 3 years, and you really start to wonder, I mean, how long could this streak go for? I mean, he is one solid looking player.
He really is, and he's improved the one area in his game with his putter where he really needed to improve, and he's made remarkable changes. He's always been one of the best chippers, short game guys. For a tall guy, where we thought it was impossible for tall guys to be great with short game. I mean, he's unmatched in his ability to hit a wedge, whether it's full or half, take some spin off it, bring some launch down, which we didn't think that the guys that were tall would be able to do that as well as he's doing it. He's made it look like it's easy.
Yeah, he has been so fun to watch. Brad, let me talk a little bit about your career. And, I'll just add, you and I are fortunate to have some good mutual friends, Mark Loomis, Jay Delsing, Guy Burrows, so I've kind of always known you guys through them. But it was really special to get to know your dad down here at Coral Ridge Country Club in Fort Lauderdale. And, just an absolute class act, incredibly nice guy. I loved seeing him down here. I guess he passed a couple of years ago.
I give him all the credit for my entrance into the golf world. He was a very good player himself. He was a scratch golfer, was a junior champion in the state. He was a junior champion at his club on Cape Cod called Woods Hole. His brother and his sister were very, very good players as well. My grandfather was a good player. He taught me the game. He taught me life. He taught me etiquette. He taught me the importance of looking somebody in the eye, shaking your hand firmly, getting up early, giving it 100%. And he brought me to great places. And I know as he retired and started coming down to your place at Coral Ridge and would go down, he had so many friends and he just loved the golf. And, he could walk to the course from where he lived. I don't know. He had a gift. I don't know if you believe that there's genes involved in sport from your parents, but I had a gift with the putter that he was a great putter. I practiced hard. It wasn't like I was just lucky that that's all I have, but he taught me to be a grinder, to never give up, to never quit. And those attributes in golf are essential if you want to play at a high level.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna hold off because I want to talk to you about putting, but let's just before we get there. So you grew up in Rhode Island. You came out of high school. You went to Furman, which Furman has a pretty decent golf reputation. It's had some solid players on the LPGA Tour. I'm gonna assume you weren't highly recruited out of high school, and it was a short golf season without a doubt. But I mean, you go down to Furman, you're a two-time All-American. And you won the Haskins Award in 1983, which people don't understand that's the best player in college. So, I mean, you had just an incredible transformation, going from Rhode Island down to South Carolina and Furman.
I would have said, Chris, that Rhode Island obviously wouldn't think that as a hotbed for professional golfers, but we had a bunch of Rhode Islanders that played on the PGA Tour. There was a golfer named Dana Quigley, who was a club pro. Not far from where I grew up. He caddied and went to the same high school. Caddied at Rhode Island Country Club, went to the same high school as I did. His brother Paul was state amateur champion multiple times. His son, Paul's son Brett, played on the PGA Tour, still plays on the Champions Tour. Jimmy Hallett, P.H. Horgan. We had so many Rhode Island guys that were Roddy Butcher. We had guys that played on the PGA Tour, played professionally. And it's kind of cool. but I wasn't recruited highly. As a matter of fact, I had never heard of Furman, but my grandfather used to go down to Sea Island in the winter times, and he met a guy that was from Furman, headed up the development office there, and my grandfather would have rather had me stay up and go to some Ivy League school in the Northeast, but I wanted to play golf. I introduced myself to the coach at a national tournament I was at as a junior. He looked at me and said, Rhode Island, we don't ever see anybody from Rhode Island. And what was good for me is when I got accepted to Furman, I got a $400 scholarship, $400 scholarship for the year. And I knew we had a good enough team, that we had a good enough schedule, that I was going to see players from Wake Forest, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and I would be playing against those players. So I thought, look, I want to play. I don't want to get, I got a letter from the then coach at Wake Forest named Jesse Haddock saying, you're never going to make it at our team. Walk-ons don't make it, which really ticked me off. And I ended up saving that and putting it on the bunk bed above me. And I saw that every day, that you'll never be good enough to play at Wake Forest. Well, I was a late bloomer in junior golf. I was a late bloomer in college. So like you said, I made All-American, first team All-American my junior and senior years. And anybody that plays on a golf team sees the All-American plaques. And when I looked at the plaques when I first got to Furman, almost every single player that was a first team All-American had made their name on the PGA Tour. And I knew that, hey, if I can make first team All-American, I got a good chance of being a PGA Tour player. I didn't want to be a 30-year journeyman that nobody had heard about. And I got lucky. I graduated from Furman in 4 years. I got my card the first year. I never lost my card. Won some tournaments. I played around the world, represented my country a few different times. I don't know. I feel like a lot of people would think that I'm an overachiever. I think a little bit of an underachiever. So maybe that's good to feel both sides of that. But I really don't regret anything.
So let me just ask you quickly. I mean, obviously, you and Billy Andre at some point became very close friends. So were you guys, and Billy went on to play at Wake Forest. So were you guys very good friends growing up, or was it kind of more as you got into like the more of the golf world?
Well, golf introduced us. Billy is 3 years younger than I am. He grew up in a neighboring town to Barrington called Bristol. He went to a different high school than I did. He went to a private school. So we never really played against each other in high school competition. We played against each other in some junior tournaments. But back then, that 3 year difference in age was a big difference, wasn't it? It really was late in high school for him and me. I had just gone to school. We started playing some bigger amateur tournaments. We were together all the time, traveling around. We drove our car from Rhode Island to his grandparents' place down near you at Boca West, to just to get some golf in while we were home from break. And I don't know. We've done a lot of cool things together, Billy and I, our wives, in the charitable world. But yeah, we were close friends. But he was a star as a junior player, national, PGA Junior Champion of the Year. He was Arnold Palmer Scholarship guy at Wake Forest, and he's had a very nice career too.
Yeah, no, he has. And we'll come back to what you guys have done together in charity. But let me ask you quick before I get into your putting. Have you been fortunate enough to play with Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, who I guess graduated from Furman in '93? Do you know Alexander?
Well, I do, only because he got in the news, let's call it 2 months ago, after he met with President Trump. And all of a sudden I get in text from everybody, hey, this guy went to Furman, did you know him? And I go, well, no, I'd like to tap into him and see if he's getting money to that Furman golf program, because it still needs a little bit.
Yeah.
But no, that was cool to hear that Finland's, what is he, the ambassador or president of?
He's the president. It sounds
President, yeah.
like, he's played golf with our president, and they've
Amazing.
struck up. I think he has been greatly elevated over there in
Totally.
Europe because of the golf. Amazing, right? What golf can do for you in life.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. So, Brad, anybody who thinks of you thinks of putting. I mean, you're an absolute guru on the topic. You coach one of the greatest players in the history of the game, and you are widely known as being one of the best putters ever on the PGA Tour. So, You kind of touched on this before. A lot of it came down from your dad. I mean, would you look at this and say, Chris, it was athletic ability, it was genes, I had an absolute pure stroke, I had supreme confidence, maybe a combination. And the only thing I'll add, and I mean this in the best of ways, I can remember watching you play. I'm only a few years younger than you. I watched you play a ton. I almost felt like when you were playing and you were putting, you almost looked like you were showing off. You were just one of the best putters I've ever seen in my life.
I think if you go out there with the mentality that I'm going to show off, kind of like you see Steph Curry do when he's going to warm up before he plays basketball, that's a good feeling when you can do that. I always liked and enjoyed putting. Uh, I had a tremendous influence early in my career from Bob Rotella, the sports psychologist, and uh, he wanted you to smile when you putt, and not literally smile while you're putting, but um, think about the good parts of what you do, and that was the part of the game that I'm not going to say it was the easiest, but what I understood the most. I kept it athletic, instinctual. I don't. It's funny, I don't think anybody would have picked my stroke out and said, "Oh my gosh, this guy's got a great stroke," if I didn't make them. It's like
Yeah.
I had some unusual stuff in my putting stroke. I had a very strong left-hand grip. I used a bullseye when I first got on the tour. Nobody uses a bullseye anymore. Um, I tried to keep my left wrist kind of locked on the backswing and then change that subtly a little bit. But when you make up, when you make a lot of putts, people all of a sudden start to tell you the reason why is because it was mechanics. I'm like, there's always that blend, and sometimes it's a little bit more on the mechanical side, sometimes a little bit more on the mental side of it, the confidence side of it. But I enjoyed being out there. I did what every kid did. I practiced putts. I made a lot of short putts when I was a kid, or whether it was around the clock or making 300 or 100 in a row from 3 feet. Uh, all the different putting contests you have with your friends. And I always say I did it organically. Yeah, if the one fault I see in today's kid or parent really is they want the answer in an hour. We pay for a golf lesson for an hour at most clubs, and for $400 or whatever you charge in an hour, they want all the answers right then. And I'm like, I learned this organically. I got thrown out on the course as a 12 or 13-year-old, and all of a sudden I had to read putts for members on greens at Rhode Island Country Club that had a lot of slope. There was always wind there. And I got good at reading greens. And then I got good at kind of starting it online. And I practiced enough knowing that this is how hard I'd have to hit a putt based on all the factors. You can't just teach that in one small bit of time. It doesn't sound romantic. But I was given, like you said, from my dad, the old school rule: you can go to the club, you come home when the streetlights come on, you're going to stay in school, you're going to get good grades. If you don't get good grades, you're not going to play golf. And that was big motivation for me. And there was sacrifice, Chris. Going to school, I wanted to make the team right away as a freshman. Freshmen didn't play often. I had a team that if I played well, I was going to make that team, but I didn't join a fraternity. I didn't, I knew if I didn't keep grades up, I wasn't going to play, and again, that same mentality that you got to try hard. I ended up having a pretty good GPA. And again, you could talk to all your friends about that. Is that something you're born with? Is that something you learn? I don't know if I know that. I'm trying to figure that out about my kids. It's hard to answer.
Just fun to watch without a doubt. I mean, really fun. And I'll ask you quickly. I want to keep you moving, but I've seen you speak a little bit about some of the work you've done with Rory, and I enjoyed hearing the story of how you guys initially got connected through everything. That was great. But I know you wanted Rory to kind of get back to just being kind of natural, athletic, kind of the feel he had as a kid. I mean, has that been the biggest part of it? Has he had to make many mechanical changes, or you think it's just kind of been more like, hey, just get back to that natural athletic feel?
Well, first of all, I'll say something that Stan Utley, who is another very good player, turned into a remarkable teacher, top 50 Golf Digest panel this year, and Stan said he learned something from his track coach. If you want to be a track coach, get fast kids, right? You know,
Yeah.
and I got asked to watch Rory hit some putts, and Rory was already one of the best players in the world. It's not like I helped him from when he was a kid. He learned like I did. He had a dad that was a golfer that threw him out on the golf course and let him do laps playing golf and practicing. He didn't have to tell him much. And he's a gifted player, no doubt. Uh, I think what I see now is sometimes wrong versus right or different than what I would believe. If you are trying to play the tour, most every tour player now is hiring a swing coach, hiring a short game coach, hiring a sometimes separate than the short game coach, as a putting coach, a psychologist, trainer. Um, I think if I do my job well, I should be teaching independence, not dependence, where I don't need to watch any player hit a putt from every distance every day. And I kind of get nervous now that are we doing too much? And Rory's one of those players that he can tell you the two or three things he thinks about. He can diagnose that, self-diagnose it when it's off. He's had a remarkable year on the greens this year. From when I met him, he was outside the top 100 in putting stats for a few years in a row, and this year he finished fourth, fifth strokes gained putting. It makes me smile, and he does too, because it's a weapon now for him. He's won events because he's putted great. Usually he had to win an event by not putting poorly and just hitting it so well tee to green. And I think that's going to really help him as he ages. Because remarkably, if I look at all my stats, and we didn't have ShotLink until 2003, so I was still a good putter then, but I got better at putting the older I got. My numbers when I was 35 to 40 were the best they ever were. And everybody thinks putting's a young person's strength, but I think through the work with Bob Rotella, the work I did just practicing Scotty Cameron and what he's done, at Titleist, and being able to diagnose player strokes, all those things contributed big time.
I will just say quickly, I think sometimes when you have just elite ball strikers like Scotty and Rory, sometimes you kind of watch and think, oh, they're not putting that well, right? Because they're just hitting so many greens, so many good shots. And, they might be leaving themselves 15 to 20 feet. And I think people just automatically expect that Rory and, Scotty are going to make all those. But at the end of the day, you just don't make that many putts. I don't care who you are. But I think sometimes it's misleading just because their ball striking is so good.
Yeah, you could throw John Rahm in that mix too, because I think you heard Rahm say that, look, I'm hitting so many more greens than everybody else. How can you expect me to make as many putts? In my philosophy would be, are you able to differentiate between your par putts and your birdie putts and just say, listen, I'm going to try and make everything we do the same. I'm not going to give any sense of enormity or importance to a putt because it's for an eagle or a birdie rather than for a par. And most players that I've talked to say they normally putt their par putts and their bogey putts better than they do their birdie putts. I'm like, wait, I think it makes you change things. And I'm like, I don't think you need to do that. Easy concept to hear and to say, but maybe hard to do. You get a 15-footer for a birdie, all of a sudden you try a little harder. I don't want a 3-putt. I don't, what if I leave this short? You start thinking a little bit differently rather than if it's a bogey putt, you're so committed, you're decisive, you usually have more pace on those things. I don't want to make worse than bogey, and you might putt them better.
Yeah, that is interesting. Brad, let me ask you quickly. So Tiger Woods will turn 50 in December. He tore his Achilles in March. He's kind of been spending some time in recovery mode since then. There was some video out within the last 2 weeks of Tiger hitting wedges at an event up in New Jersey. His swing certainly looked really good. We don't know how far advanced he is beyond a wedge. I mean, this would just be huge for the senior tour, right? I mean, the galleries, can you imagine, that would show up, let alone the TV ratings. Do you have any feel, and maybe it's just going to be pure speculation as to whether we'll see Tiger on the Champions Tour in 2026?
I'm sure everybody in the world wants to see Tiger play more golf. I do. Um, I don't know if the PGA Tour wants to see Tiger play more golf on the PGA Tour Champions, because then less people will watch the PGA Tour. Uh, he's got to stay healthy. He's got to get his putter back to where it's been, because he hasn't putted well the last few times he's played. I'm pulling for him. His son Charlie lives in my neighborhood here where I live at Old Palm Golf Club. I've spent a little bit of time with Charlie on the putting green. He's a great kid. And I think Charlie is going to get some help from his dad, and vice versa. I think Tiger's going to get a help from Charlie, like Marco Mira did from Tiger. That I think watching Charlie play, having the ability now to go play from the same tees with his son, and he's watched him play in all these tournaments. I think that may extend Tiger's career and get him to play a little bit more.
Yeah. Listen, I hope we see him out there. We'd love to.
No
Obviously,
kidding.
everybody would like. Can you imagine turning on a Champions event and just seeing, it might only be one hole,
Yeah.
but just lined with spectators, which I'm sure it would be amazing. I'm keeping you longer than promised. I'm going to move quick, but I want to ask you one question, because your perspective on this will be so cool, because you were a solid tour player and now you're in the TV booth. And I kind of asked Ian Baker Finch the same question. So as we hit on before, so tour players are now owners of PGA Tour Enterprises, which is really unique and I think somewhat overlooked, right? Because it's the only major sport where, this happens. So from a fan, I'm wondering now, can the top players, so let's say the top 36 players were awarded $750 million of PGA Tour Enterprises equity. Can these guys take it upon themselves? And I'm sure they're still all trying to figure out their schedule and the signature events, and they got an extra signature event at Trump's place down at Doral this year. But I wonder, can these guys take it upon themselves and say, guys, the TV contracts are ultimately what drives the value for the most part in all of sports. I think you guys, they're locked in through 2030. But I wonder if the top players can take it amongst themselves and say, hey, can we just try and make it so we have some representation of the top players in maybe just about all the events? The fall events, I'm fine with that. But I wonder, and I'm personally so grateful to any top tour player who stayed and didn't take money. And, if everybody had done it, we might not have a PGA Tour right now. But do you think, you have a very unique perspective, will the players at some point take it amongst themselves and say, we've got to get, better representation in all the events? As I'm sure Strategic Sports Group would love to see that as well.
Yeah. So I think if you asked the average PGA Tour player to explain PGA Tour Enterprises equity program, they're going to have a hard time explaining to you what it means specifically to them in their own pocket. If you went to some of the players that are more experienced with this, that have been out there for a while, I mentioned Patrick Cantley and Adam Scott, that have been on the policy board. They're going to have a little bit of an idea of how much money they can get, but they have to fully vest. They have to play for a certain amount of time in order to get all that distribution, and continuing to play a lot and play more longer will help them to earn out as well. And these guys are going to figure out this is a ton of money, and to stay on the PGA Tour, they will be interested in some of the investments PGA Tour Enterprises does, whether it's with equipment companies, technologies, new ways to view it like TGL, that if PGA Tour Enterprises invest in those, that's going to end up helping put money into their bottom line. And it's an opportunity that I wish, you always wish you were 30 years younger, don't you? But I wish I was 30 years younger, where I had the chance for some of this great amount of money to come in.
Yeah, and I'm not going to ask you this, but I'll leave this question out there. It's been a fabulous year for the tour. But I guess what you wonder looking at this from the outside is, let's just say in simplest accounting terms, is this cash flow positive, right? I mean, we have these huge purses now. We have these signature events. Can the tour exist with this model, or is this still going to be funded by 1.5 billion and maybe more after that? So I'm not going to ask you on that, but we'll leave that one out there if that's
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know if I can get that one, but
Yeah.
no, I'm impressed with how much stuff you know is going on behind the scenes here, Chris.
I'd be honest with you. I grew up playing a lot of basketball. I started caddying when I was 10, so I've always been involved with the game. I'm a huge fan, without a doubt, and always have been.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, it's funny. When I was on this Alaska trip, I got a call from Guy Burrows. You mentioned him in the opening. I didn't see that he left a message, but I remember I played a lot of golf with Guy, and he was always somebody that say, hey, he'd send me a nice text or call me when he saw my dad. And I have great memories of, his later life down there in Fort Lauderdale.
Guy's the best. He and I played a lot of golf down here. Brad, I'm not going to let you go without touching on this final issue, which to me is so impressive. If I take you back to 1999, you and your good friend Billy Andrade started the CVS Charity Classic, and you ran with that for 23 years. And amazingly, you guys raised over $25 million for charities. I mean, could you guys ever envision starting that up in 99 that you guys are going to raise over 25 million? That is really impressive.
Yeah, we were lucky in a lot of ways. And I could even say, Chris, in 1991 and 92, Billy and I started a celebrity event that gets sometimes confused with that CVS charity event. We had all kinds of impressive celebrity golf, sports celebrities come. Charles Barkley, Julius Erving, Glenn Fry, Sandy Koufax, Bobby Orr, Cam Neely. We had Bob Cousy, John Havlicek. We had the biggest names you could ever imagine to come play to Rhode Island. And we gave all that money to children's charities. That's raised, oh God, over, I think, $12 million. So, and that's still going on. The CVS Charity Classic started with then CEO Tom Ryan, who lives down here near us in the wintertime, a Rhode Island guy that we just copied the format from the Fred Meyer Challenge where Peter Jacobson had started that. And CVS had been involved with golf and the CVS Charity Classic at what was it called? Pleasant Valley. And we kept this thing going for a long time, I think, because CVS was in Rhode Island Country Club liked the idea. We had a lot of money to play for a couple days. We had Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer and Gary Player and Nancy Lopez and Julie Inkster and Annika Sorenstam and Ernie Els. We had so many great players come up there. We were lucky, but yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just being in the right place at the right time, and Rhode Island was a great place to be from.
Yeah, yeah, no, that was so admirable, Brad. This has been so great catching up. I really appreciate your time. You've been busy. Thank you so much. We all greatly look forward to watching you and your colleagues next week at Bethpage. We wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. I'm glad we got this done. I'm very impressed, and hopefully I'll see you down there at your club sometime.